something amazing to feel your passion blazing and shine.
Paint with every vision, dance in new directions, explode to new heights in your mind.
I will rise up with you today.
Lift up my
voice and boldly say, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to AGNT Speaks. It is a great day to be joining together in consciousness, to be joining together for our collective awakening. So we come to you live every week here, and we are your AGNT, the Association for Global New Thought Leadership Council. I serve on that council with my colleagues. Each one of them comes to you with me every week for a power-packed message, a mindfulness practice, or an affirmative prayer meditation experience. So we are just grateful to have this spiritual community, this spiritual consciousness coming to you live wherever you are. If you want to get up close and personal in the Zoom room, please know that you can join us. You can find links below this post, and you can join us in the Zoom room so that after the live broadcast, you can ask your questions or you can engage firsthand in a conscious discussion about the topics at hand today. So I am your host, Reverend Erin McCabe, and I come to you live from Missouri, where I serve as the spiritual leader of Unity Village Chapel, located on grounds at Unity Headquarters, the headquarters of the Unity Movement, where we host Unity Worldwide Ministries and Unity Village. So it is a delight to join together with you. I have a passion for cultivating care, for inspiring mindfulness, and for awakening consciousness within all of us and among us. And that's why we're here today. So I have the great honor to introduce to you and to welcome to the platform here the amazing Reverend Deborah Johnson. She comes to us live from California today, where she is the spiritual leader of a dynamic, transformative spiritual community. So Deborah, welcome, and what do you have for us today?
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Reverend Erin, for hosting this phenomenal forum that is so important in these days. You know, we've been having these sessions so that we can grow deeper. We've been having these sessions so that we can be responsive to the times. You know, one of the things that I really love about the New Thought movement, which I've been a part of since probably the mid-70s or so, I really appreciate the fact that we are waking up in the understanding of what our role and position is. That not only are we to do the deep inner work to heal the things that are going on within us, but since there's only one of us here, that also means that we have to pay attention to the collective consciousness. We have a tendency, I think, sometimes in the New Thought movement to really focus on individual consciousness and not really take into consideration that everything is consciousness and that we have equal responsibility for what's taking place in the collective consciousness. That if we are going to be having a world that works for everyone, which you know is our vision and our motto. You and I, Reverend Erin, serve on the Leadership Council of the Association of Global New Thought. And we have a vision of a world that works for everyone. That's not going to happen just on its own. To have the vision that works for everyone, where a world that works for everyone, means we're going to have to do some work. It means that we're going to have to usher in the global transformation that we're talking about. And part of the reason why we've been having this series is to develop the muscle, to develop the intent, the will, the capacity, the know-how to realize how to bring forth this vision that we have of this world that works for everyone. What I'd like to speak specifically about in our session today is expanding our capacity to see, expanding our capacity to be aware. Everything expresses along a continuum. There's a fullness that's going on. And I've noticed a lot of times as metaphysicians, people in the New Thought movement, we want to label some things good and some things bad. That there are things that we want to turn our attention away from. I don't want to look at that because that's negative. I don't want to focus on that because it's negative. If there's things that you were unwilling to take a look at, you are empowering them. If there are things that you are unwilling to take a look at, in your mind, what you're saying is that they are greater than you are, that they are bigger than you are. And we want to exercise spiritual dominion. It isn't that we want our attention to be riveted on things that are out of alignment, but we can't heal what we don't feel. We can't heal what we don't feel. We have to feel, deal, and heal. And in order to be responsive, we have to acknowledge that something's going on. In order for us to be responsive, we have to see it. As we say in illness, don't get stuck on the cancer. You see through the cancer. You see beyond the cancer. You don't get stuck on just the ills of the world. You pierce through them and see the perfect pattern underneath and call it forth. But you got to be willing to look through it. You know, the early New Thought leaders were Christian mystics. And one of the things that Jesus taught is when you pray, you say, to the mountain move. You don't just talk about the mountain. You confront it, you say, to it move. When I say that everything exists along a continuum, there's only the spiritual qualities. That's it. There's not love and anything. There's not peace and anything. There's joy, there's peace, there's power, there's creativity, there's authenticity, there's freedom, there's order, there's all these things. And it's just a question of how much they are expressing. When I say it's a continuum is open on both ends. That means that it can always express at lower levels and it can always express at higher levels. We've never reached the nth degree of how something can show up. It can always get better and it can always get worse. If we were to take, for example, something like temperature, okay, there can be 85 degrees Fahrenheit plus. There can also be 85 degrees Fahrenheit minus. Okay? But it's still measuring the heat. Listen to what I'm saying. It's measuring the heat. There's just a lesser amount of heat showing at the 85 degrees minus, but it's still measuring the heat. It's kind of like when you have a light bulb. You can have 15 watts, you can have 500 watts, but it's still a measure of the light. And there's no amount of darkness that can overtake the light. So if we find ourselves in the darkness, we don't go, oh, I don't want to look at the darkness. That's too much darkness. I don't want to see that much darkness. No, see the light. I don't care how much light there is. See that, magnify that, see that, claim that, see that, and dial up the notches. The darker it appears to be, the greater the luminosity is of just the smallest amount of light. And before we open it up for some questions, I want to share something with you that's in one of my books, The Sacred Yes. I get these incredible spiritual downloads that come in the form of letters on a series called Letters from the Infinite. And the first volume is The Sacred Yes. The second volume is Your Deepest Intent. And in The Sacred Yes, that spirit voice is saying, you know, you really need to get rid of that metaphor about is the glass half empty or half full. It says because it keeps you looking at the wrong thing. It keeps you looking at the glass. Bless the water. It's the same amount of water no matter how much or how big the glass is. If you have 3 ounces of water and you have it in a 3-ounce glass, you say, I'm filled to the brim. 2-ounce glass, you say it's overflowing. In a 3-gallon container, you might say, I don't have anything. But it's the same amount of water. See, we're too busy judging ourselves by what appears to be the size of our containers. But we're the water. We are the exact same amount and the fullness of ourselves, regardless of what the outer context, whatever container it is. Then it says, and those of you who are saying that it's half empty, you aren't even seeing the water. You're focusing on the empty space of the container. Bless the water. Let's develop some more spiritual muscle to be able to see the divine everywhere, no matter what level it is expressing at.
I love this conversation. I know this is one of those hard to believe things, but I hosted a Zoom group just yesterday where the glass half empty conversation came up, and I spent much of the morning jotting down the notes and the downloads around a Sunday conversation fully on this topic.
I believe it.
Idea, yeah, I mean, like everything from start to finish, we are completely in sync. I was just sitting here taking notes while you're talking, going, oh wait, oh she's going there, oh she's going there. One of the things that struck me from this conversation the other day with beloveds on the Zoom room was this idea. You know, someone was talking about you know, reframing and what we focus on, and it came through as that idea that sometimes in New Thought and in metaphysical practice, we think that when we focus on our meditation, when we focus on the spiritual aspect, when we focus on whatever, that we are going to automatically make this whole glass all the way full of water, and it will only be water if water is what we call the good, right? Mm-hmm. But in fact, it's the practice is so that the space can be there, the emptiness or the darkness can be there, and the water or the light can be there. But it is our vision that changes. It's our vision that transforms. It's what we focus on. It's not that if I am a spiritual person, things that are negative will never happen to me. If I have a positive intention, I can't possibly live in a world of inequality and racism and all these injustices that we see. That's not happening because I must have a higher vibration that just doesn't happen. It's that what we focus on, we are magnetizing. It's that we see through it differently. We become co-creators in a different way when we can see clearly. So when we have clear vision, when we get our kind of metaphysical purpose here to be awake and aware, then it transforms. It transforms, but it doesn't mean that that we just look at things that are happening and they're not happening, or that somehow we are immune to everything.
Yeah, that's spiritual malpractice. And that's a complete misunderstanding of spiritual principles. There is not a spiritual tradition in the world that promises that you will not have heartache and that things will not happen to you. Life happens. There's illness, there's death, there's injuries, there's sorrow, there's all of that. The promise of the spiritual life is resilience. The promise of the spiritual life is restoration. The promise of the spiritual life is that ability to overcome. The promise of the spiritual life is that everlasting life that Jesus spoke of, which is the Greek word zoe. Everlasting life is not a quantitative something, it is a qualitative something. I happen to be one of the Bible instructors at Home Institute for the Centers for Spiritual Living, where I studied. And one of the things that Jesus says at the end of this long section that they put together that they refer to as the Sermon on the Mount is he gives this little parable where at the end of all of this, he says, he who hears these words of mine and does them is likened to the wise man that builds his house upon the rock. And when the wind and rain come, the house still stands. But he who hears all these things that I'm saying and doesn't do anything with it is likened to the foolish man that builds his house on the sand. And when the winds and the rain comes, great is the fall of the house. First off, as metaphysicians, we would think, well, that's negative. It's negative to say that the house is going to fall. It's cause and effect. You do this, you get that. You build on sand, it falls. That's not negative. That's just principle, because sand is granulated rock. It shifts. You cannot build in it.
Right. No matter how much you pray on it or meditate on it or you did whatever to it, it's still going to slide.
Exactly. One of those spirit letters I was talking about actually said to me, my Reverend daughter, what more do you need to know about sand to understand that it shifts? Why do you keep asking me why this thing, why that? You built it in sand. Does it matter how pretty of an edifice? It was in sand. And the thing that was coming forth in this parable is that the wise man and the foolish man, the one who was using the spiritual principles and the one who wasn't using the spiritual principles, were both subjected to the same thing: the wind, the rain, and the storm. The difference was the outcome. The difference was the experience of life. You don't get to escape the weather. There's not a new kind of weather for you because you're doing the spiritual work.
Yes.
It just means that your experience of the weather will be different.
Yes.
So we make the mistake of thinking that our experience is what happens. The experience isn't what happens, it's how you experience what happens. It's how you name what happens.
Yes.
Let's go through the same stuff. You're going to go through the exact same stuff. Illness, injury, we're all out of here. Every marriage ends. Death, divorce, but till death do us part. It's even in the marriage vows that there's some point when this thing is going to end. Everything everything in the material world, this too shall pass. That's why I'm saying we've got to develop the spiritual maturity.
Yes.
The spiritual maturity to not feel like failures, to not desperately trying to hold on to the things whose time it is to pass, to not empower all of the things of the world that really need our attention.
Yeah.
We're not looking at it, we're actually complicit. When we're not looking at it, we become part of the problem because we are not gracing that thing with our awareness of a higher vibration.
Right.
We're colluding by the unwillingness to see. But if we're willing to take a look, if we're willing to speak the word into it and get that power, things can shift. And we are here for such a time as this. We are here for this shift, whether it's the Me Too movement, whether it's the Black Lives movement, whether it's to make it through COVID-19, whether it's to get beyond the red, blue of the election cycle. I could go on and on. We are here for such a time as this to speak the word so that we all have a different experience of all of these circumstances and conditions and help them to transform and get into alignment with divine design.
Amen. Woo. So thank you everyone for being here for this conversation. If you want to hop into the Zoom room, you're going to meet Reverend Deborah and I there in just a moment. So go ahead and log on if you have not done so yet. Remember that you can be here with us live every single week on AGNT Speaks. If you want to learn more about AGNT or support this great work, there's a link listed down below. You can also follow the link to find out about the live stream services that we all offer every week and where our YouTube videos and all of that stuff is posted. So you have an amazing spiritual support network here with AGNT. And so we invite you to take a look at those pages. Thank you for being here with us and join us live next week with AGNT Speaks.
I have a lifelong social activist background. And what I have noticed, particularly in progressive spiritual communities or communities like this, that are this hybrid of science and spirituality, that we tend to be very comfortable in realms 1 and 3. That we're okay talking about the way in which everybody is part of this big cosmic soup, and there's no differentiation between us, and we're one with the cosmos and everything, part of that infinite potentiality. And there's ways in which we're individualized expressions. We all have our unique patterns and ways of being, but there can be sometimes a little apprehension about talking about the ways in which we're like some people and not other people, as though speaking of difference deters from the oneness. Like, how can you hold those two? If you're talking about difference, aren't you getting away from the oneness? Well, why do you want to do that? Because too many of us associate in the human realm difference with divisiveness. Difference with divisiveness. And we associate oneness with uniformity. But the oneness isn't uniformity. The oneness is unity. But it's unity in the diversity. We get that at every other level. We get how you've got different varieties of dogs, you've got different varieties of cats, you have different varieties of all these other things, and we don't find it threatening. Why we find difference threatening to us on a human level is because we mimic love with emulation. I know you're loved and you're one of us because you act like us, you look like us, you do things like us. So there's this big fear sometimes that if you express in a way that's different than the rest of us, then somehow or another you are threatening the unity